Hi everyone, welcome to episode 3 of Own Your Lane. Let me just pin this. Oops. Hi Rima. Awesome. Welcome to episode 3 of Own Your Lane. We're waiting for Abdullah to join. So yeah. So today, Abdullah is going to talk about civic engagement, the importance of representation, and then kind of how our community can move forward with both, and then also his lens of anti-Black racism and how it's been prominent in Dearborn and other communities as a whole. So just waiting for him to join. So as always, if you have any questions, drop them in the comments and we'll try to get to those. So yes, Abdullah should be joining shortly. For those of you that have not purchased your book yet, book club starts next week officially. We're reading Freedom is a Constant Struggle by Angela Davis. Very excited about that one. And then if you are a high school or a student, you can purchase, or not purchase, you can claim the book for free in the link in our bio. So make sure you do that. Our orders are going to be probably going out the end of the week. How do you join the book club? Well, it's very easy. You just sign up in the link in our bio and you'll be added to our Zoom call every Tuesday. Yes, Mariam, I have burnt cheeks. And we'll go from there. So, yeah. But yeah, thank you for that question. Book club has been like our new favorite staple. So, and this one's a good book too. No, you don't have to read the book. Good question, Mariam. You can, we've made it so the book club's super accessible and you can kind of join in with the discussion, and we've made it so the conversations are always relevant and you can always bring things like current events that are happening and things that you want to talk about. So yeah, I'm waiting for Abdullah. Hopefully he didn't get lost on the way here. Oh, Abdullah's here. He just joined. Waiting to connect. Hi!
Hey, what's going on?
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Really happy to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for this.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
No worries, honestly.
I'm just going to have you introduce yourself for those of our viewers who might not know you. So just give your Abdullah's spiel.
Yeah, of course. So my name is Abdullah Hammoud, born and raised in the city of Dearborn. I think my most profound characteristic and trait is I'm a Fordson graduate. But honestly, born and raised, son of immigrants, one of 5 siblings, and I have the distinct honor and privilege of serving as the state representative for Michigan's 15th district, which is our hometown, the city of Dearborn, the greatest city in all the land.
Yeah.
Epidemiologist, public health professional by trade. And honestly, at heart, I'm just a Dearbornite through and through, and I love what I do.
This is actually really fun for me because I actually door knocked for your campaign.
Yes, I do remember that.
Everything is
several times. Super excited for this.
So my first question for you is, what does activism mean to you? And specifically, what does that look like in Dearborn?
Activism takes many forms. Personally for me, the way I look at it, activism is, primarily, I would say, are those who are on the ground, out in the streets doing the work. If there's a big power plant that's pulling a permit to increase emissions and pollutions in our area, activism is organizing that community, mobilizing them, getting them to attend the community town halls to push back against that corporation. Activism is the grassroots organizers, rallying in the streets, protesting police brutality. Activism is identifying a problem and then trying to find a solution that works for the greater community. Activism is, it takes the form of being on social media and sharing your mind, or using your platform to share the minds of others who are traditionally silenced. So activism takes many forms. I like to think that although I'm elected, I'm an activist at heart, and I just took activism with me to the platform of state representative. As long as you keep your ear to the ground, and you stay rooted in your community, which is something that Rashida, Congresswoman Tlaib, loves to say. I'd like to think that you're an activist at heart if your intentions are pure. You have the people at the center of mind.
Yeah. I think that's why you resonate with the community so well too, is that you're all like, everything you just said was community focused and putting the people in the center. And a lot of politicians don't do that. And that's why there's a deep distrust.
Unfortunately, American politics has this large distrust between community and elected officials. And I think you're 100% right. It largely has to do with, one, it seems distant. Elected officials tend to seem very distant from the community they're supposed to serve, as opposed to it's your neighbor, it's your friend, it's your cousin, it's your, somebody you grew up with. And we try to do that to the best of our abilities. And by we, I mean my team and myself. We make ourselves as accessible as possible. If you have an issue, I don't mind if you Instagram DM the message and trying to get a response, or Facebook, or tweet at me. We'll respond through all forms. If you're running to me at a grocery store, I'm going to have that conversation and take the time. And I think that helps to bridge what many people seem to be, oh, you're an elected official, you're on this other level. But what in fact, I'm literally, I like to say, I'm just Abdullah from Fortson, and I happen to have this title to try to do some good for our community.
I love that. I love that. So I'm actually going to have you take us backwards and talk about your activism trajectory, and specifically in terms of anti-Black racism and kind of how your perspective has developed, especially growing up in Dearborn.
Yeah, I grew up in the post 9/11 era. I think the first encounter I had with real racism personally, 9/11, my mother picked us up from Woodworth Middle School at the time, and she's a woman who observes hijab. And when she picked us up, we were cut off by another vehicle, who then, yelled out some obscenities towards her, flicked her off, and said a whole bunch of things because she was, obviously a Muslim woman. The next day, walking home from school, me and my friends were walking home from school, and there was a gentleman who pointed a gun out of his window and who said, "Keep walking before I decide to shoot you Muslim children, or you Muslim kids." Mm-hmm. And I was 11. Uh-huh. And in the next decade after that, I experienced the anti-Muslimness, obviously, that was just rampant in the media, rampant across the globe. And so I grew up in that. But I never let it sway me. Obviously, Dearborn was our quote-unquote safe bubble. We had a community. We leaned on one another. But it really opened up my eyes. And then I recall when I first moved to Ann Arbor for graduate school, I was sitting down the day of my first graduate school exam. And it was the winter time. And I had one of those big puffy hats that people tend to wear. And on the inside of it, when I was just looking at it, on the label, there was a Bible quote, which was very strange. So I brought it up as a conversation. I said, look at this Bible quote inside of this hat. And the person sitting next to me read it and said, "Did you know that your prophet slaughtered millions of people in order to start their religion?" And that was I was 20.
Wow.
And that was the first time I'd experienced it that direct outside of the city of Dearborn. In no way am I trying to say that, anti-Muslim racism is the same as anti-Black. Mm-hmm. But it certainly makes me that much stronger of an ally. If we look to the broader Arab diaspora, you obviously have a lot of Black Arabs, you have a lot of Black Muslims, and somebody who is a Muslim Arab American, I never forget that. And as a member of the Black Caucus in the state legislature, the Black Caucus is made up of all non-white legislators. And so we have an opportunity to become stronger allies, to learn from our Black leaders, and really understand, or to try to understand the plight of Black Americans. And I do that by educating myself, by reading, by listening, but by leaning on them for that knowledge.
So how have you seen that trajectory kind of progress from your time at Fortson and growing up in Dearborn? We're surrounded by people that look like us at the end of the day.
Yeah.
What have you seen that look like?
100%. I think, when I first ran for office, the issues I ran on were public health related, environmental justice, healthcare for all, economic justice. And I never looked at it through the lens of, anti-Blackness, or this marginalization of communities of color, of Black communities. But then when I started the fight for, and I'll say early on, I didn't have much of this, I'm standing up for, I'm standing up for Black Americans, or I'm rallying for Black Lives Matter. We didn't have much of that growing up in my high school days or undergraduate days. I would say that didn't really kick in until I ran for office. And that's where my trajectory really, drinking out of a fire hose. When I came to office, one of my biggest passions now from a policy perspective is criminal justice reform. It's education reform. And the more I learn of the decades of systemic oppression, the more my eyes open up, and I just can't believe all that's been happening. And we, for some reason in this bubble, weren't really paying attention to it. Obviously, we didn't have the social media back in my days of growing up, but that's also alleviated a lot of this ignorance.
Yeah.
You have to take it upon yourself to read. And I'm reading books now on a lot of these topics, and continually trying to educate myself. Last year, I was able to take a visit down to Selma and cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge myself. I went on a civil rights expedition to learn more. And that opened up my eyes more than ever. And, particularly if you look at the Montgomery bus strikes, we're rallying now in the streets. We had a protest 1 week, a protest the second week, and it kind of fizzled out. The Montgomery bus strikes lasted for over 1 year until the change was actually adopted in the community that they were protesting. And I think that's, it's always a learning process. It skyrocketed while I was in office, not so much while I was growing up.
I think it's super important what you're touching on, just learning and like making sure that process is like ongoing. We don't ever stop too. And I think that's one thing that we're trying to really like hammer home with people. It's the constantly unlearning the things that we thought were true.
100%. And it's to have, I think, the ability to recognize that you might not know, that you might have overlooked, that you might have in some way been a part of the problem, even if that part of the problem is having been silent. It's having been sitting in a room with your Arab relatives who dropped the word habit and not correcting them. There are so many small things that add over the years. And, unfortunately, we're trying to rectify those wrongs, and we're trying to be strong allies now. That's all we can do.
That's so real. So you were at the first protest in Dearborn, and so that was really cool seeing the community come together. You spoke, you were great per usual. But what have you seen Dearborn, and like how have you seen Dearborn sort of kind of become more accountable and kind of take ownership of the ways in that we perpetuate anti-Black racism, and kind of walk me through that journey and what you've seen since you've started in office?
Very early on, when in the first year or two of office, the direct connection that I saw in fighting against anti-Blackness took the form of fighting against the environmental injustices that were occurring. The residents of the south end of Dearborn, largely Yemeni American, border the residents of the southwest Detroit, largely Black African American community. And together, they are the asthma epicenter in the state of Michigan. And so fighting against these large corporations that were polluting in largely Black communities, and minority communities, that was the first my first view into this, pushing back against this anti-Blackness, corruption. Now, as we've progressed over the last several years, especially now, ever since, the murder of George Floyd, we obviously have Dearborn for Black Lives, which has emerged. They have held several rallies and protests. I know they had a very successful meeting today with the city administration about the collection of data, demographic data for arrests here in the city of Dearborn. They FOIA'd that. Hopefully that will come over the next week. I also know that Dearborn for Black Lives has been advocating for and building relationships on changing the names of Orville Hubbard. We can't forget that Dearborn is a very racist city. We have a very strong racist history. Keep Dearborn clean wasn't about keeping our city parks and our streets clean. It was about keeping Blacks out. Mayor Hubbard was a very strong segregationist. This was documented. He was proud of that fact. And we're still trying to right those wrongs even though there's a strong push against wanting to remove the statue or change the street with his name on it or change the buildings with his name on it. So I certainly think that we've matured as a community. We're becoming stronger allies. We're being more active. We're listening and lending the platforms that we may have more to our Black friends, our Black neighbors, our Black sisters and brothers. I'm very optimistic for what's to come.
Yeah, me too, honestly. Like, I think I've seen a major shift in the community and people holding themselves accountable too, especially because we are so close to an 87% Black city, that being Detroit. And so, with that being said, what specifically do you think our duty is besides unlearning, besides holding police accountable in Dearborn? What specifically do you want to see community members do on a daily basis?
You know, police brutality is just one tentacle of, oppression or systemic racism. It's not the end all be all. You have to go back to the very basics of who built these systems and how were these systems built. You know, ideally, as we progress forward, we have to talk about representation. You know, the Dearborn city population, obviously, roughly speaking, maybe 45 to 50% Arab American. You have 4% Black Americans. You have 4% Latino or Hispanic, and the remaining white. So we are a majority minority city. But if you look at our administration, you would never know that. You're talking about a city where there are, I think, 12 directors. Only the police chief technically is Arab American, but anybody that works at City Hall, we have 0 Arab American directors or Black American directors. We have 0 deputy directors that I'm aware of that are of people of color. And we have to have that conversation about representation. It's important to be at the table where decisions are made. And it's also important that while you're at that table, your voice is respected. And that's a whole nother conversation. But I think as you progress, that is what we need to be doing. We have to make sure that Dearborn is known to be a welcoming city of all races, of all colors, of all ethnicities, of all backgrounds. And obviously for many Black Americans, for many of my Black friends, they grew up knowing or having been taught, don't drive through Dearborn, avoid Dearborn, because of that long history of racism. And that's something that'll take years to address. It won't happen overnight. It won't happen once we change the name of a street. It'll happen when we finally address, the administration and the representation and so much more.
Exactly. I mean, the thing with education too is that you don't see the effects until 5-10 years later. It's not going to be an instantaneous change overnight. And I think that's one thing that people need to remember too as we're moving forward too, that it's never going to be overnight. But representation. So when we talk about representation and we say representation matters, what does that mean to you specifically?
There's several ways of trying to define representation. And I'll be the first to say, I don't have a complete answer. I think my answer continually evolves the more I learn, and the more I spend in public office and such, or in public service. First and foremost, representation from the simplest form for me is ensuring that, that the community is reflected in those who serve them. And I'm speaking obviously from the civic engagement perspective. There are 148 legislators right now in the state of Michigan. I'm the only Muslim. To me, that we lack representation in the state legislature, not because, we want to enact some sort of Muslim agenda, but because I am from the Muslim community. I'm from a very niche Muslim community. I'm Lebanese, I'm Shia. I recognize that. I'm not even amongst the majority Muslim community, but there still is a voice for the Muslim community for outreach. Secondly, there are 2 Arab Americans in all 148, yet I believe we're closer to about 5% of the population here in the state of Michigan. So representation also equates to having, equal representation for the demographic, for the percentage of the population they're representing. For the first time now in history, the Democratic caucus is 50% woman. That is representation. And you have to look at every lens of representation you can think of. But even, like I said earlier, if you have, if it's 50% Arab Americans in the city of Dearborn, 50% of your directors in the city of Dearborn are Arab American, that doesn't mean you have reached representation. Are the policies that you're enacted representative of the demographic you're trying to represent? Are they uplifting? Are they still oppressing? Are you marginalizing communities? So there's so many factors and layers to representation. I still haven't grasped them all. I'm still very much learning. But what I can tell you is that we lack representation at each and every single level of government.
Yeah.
And that's something that we need to address wholly. I mean, I think in Congress, 85% plus are white male. That's certainly not the country of America. And, you know, that we lack representation there. And obviously we see the effects of that with the policies that are being pushed down upon us.
When we talk about representation and like why it matters too, I think it's important to note that just because you have somebody that looks like you in office doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to understand the community too.
100%.
Which I think sometimes Dearborn really misses the mark with. Personally, I think we need to elect people that really have the community focus. And with that being said, I want to talk to you about the shawarma controversy. Very briefly, because we don't have to get too much into it.
Yeah.
But for anyone that doesn't know, the city of Dearborn marketing put out a sign that said, what was it, like 24 shawarma sandwiches? Like,
correct.
Yeah. Something crazy like that. And so people complained, after 48 hours, they took them down?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. So after 48 hours, they took them down. And there was a lot of opinions in the city. I personally felt that the signs minimized our identities to food. And I felt that that creates the opportunity for people to say things about our community that aren't true. And then we're in the community with the highest concentration of Arabs. We should feel safe and our identities should be celebrated. They shouldn't be made fun of, especially when the people making these decisions don't share any of our identity markers. So tell me, from your perspective, what did you think?
So Maryam Jalil is going off. First of all, saying 100% is a very Dearborn thing, and so I'm very proud of that. 24 shawarma sandwiches would mean that each shawarma sandwich is 3 inches. So that's 100% just wrong. I've never seen such a thing. You know, when I first saw the signs, at first thought, I was like, okay, you know, they're trying to be cute. But the more I thought of it, the more I got frustrated. And here's what frustrated me. First, you know, we said shawarma, you know, and people are saying, oh, it's supposed to be lighthearted, it's supposed to be funny. Okay, well, what if they said, you know, 6 sabra hummus cans? You know, what if they said 1 camel? What if they said, you know, would they go to a Mexican town and say, you know, 6 tacos? Or a largely black community and say X amount of fried chicken or 2 watermelons? You know, and I don't think they would have.
No.
So that was the first thing that came to mind. Secondly, you know, to your point about representation, those who made the decisions do not have any Arab Americans on staff. One. Those who hired who made the decisions have very few Arab Americans. And we're talking about a city that's overwhelmingly majority minority, as we just spoke to, and 0 of the directors are Arab American. And so I'm frustrated that the city wants to promote the culture, but not promote the people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, to me, was the slippery slope. And so that's why, you know, why was it that we're talking about American innovation? We said 1 F-150 away. Mm-hmm. But we wanted to just, like to your point, minimize Arab Americans to just a shawarma sandwich. Mm-hmm. When Arabs are the ones who came up with arithmetic and such. Mm-hmm. So that to me was the frustration behind it. I think it was short-sighted. You know, if it was a shawarma sandwich shop that put that out, all the more power to them.
Yeah.
If it was a you know, majority Arab administration that came forward with this idea, you know, we can have that conversation about where did that come from? Did they seek input from the community?
Yeah.
But for an all-white team, an all-white staff led by an all-white administration to put that out, we have some serious problems.
Yeah. And Donna said, isn't it the council member? So I think that was something too that people were asking too, and it wasn't city council.
Correct. City council did not approve that. So the way it works is we have some downtown district authority boards, and they hire a marketing firm that does this work on behalf of Dearborn. And mm-hmm. they did this without the approval of anybody, neither city council nor anybody within the administration. Yeah. And then when we spoke with one of the deputy directors that we know, he was the one that called them before I even reached out to them saying, hey, that's very short-sighted. Those need to come down. And lastly, I'll note, you know, the majority of those signs came out on the west end of Dearborn. You know, it's not like they put them throughout Warren and Schaefer where the majority of shawarma shops are. And it's not like they're throughout the south end of Dearborn, where you also have a large Arab American population. So again, they're very, it's very specific about where they were placed to appease, a certain part of the community. And I think it didn't take into the full context of the whole Dearborn. I think they were in East Dearborn, but largely around the Arab American Museum, from my understanding, because that's the one place we're very proud of in East Dearborn, quote unquote.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, obviously we're proud of the museum, but like, I think you're right about the fact that they like to strategically showcase the parts of Dearborn they like, and they do it from an economic standpoint, where West Dearborn, they were pumping on a bunch of money to increase people going to West Dearborn and shopping and whatnot. Like, that's great, but look at, like, East Dearborn is popping. Like, we have awesome, we have awesome. But yeah, no, I mean, that was just like a whole situation. And I think it's just a true testament of why representation matters. And moving forward too, how can we make sure that elected officials represent the community as a whole?
And I'll answer that, just one final point. Again, they were okay with promoting the culture, but not the people. And I thought about it recently. Would they have put out, because obviously Muslim Americans are sometimes very dangerous to touch, right? Would they have put out one Salli a length away, one prayer rug away? Is that something that you think that they would promote? And so again, even when they try to promote the Arab identity, it's a certain segment of the Arab identity and not even the other portion of it. In terms of elected officials, and to your question was essentially, how do you hold them accountable? How do you make sure they represent us? You have to be vocal. Something that's important to note here in the city of Dearborn, almost all elected officials live in the west end of the city. That's problematic. And most of in the west end of the city. West end of the city is obviously the most affluent part of the community. Those who run for office tend to have the ability to raise a lot of money. And so, but we have to talk about, well, how does the south end get true representation on council? Or in the or in the state legislature? And I have my meetings continuously in the south end, but if we're talking about a council perspective, how do you make sure the south end is recognized on council, the east end, the southwest end, which is different from the west and the west? And so I think that brings up a larger conversation about possibly having districts, which other large cities around our size have. Smaller districts, for example, the south end would be one city council seat. And so that somebody from the south end who lives in that area, who realizes the problems of that portion of the community, can be on the council to speak to them each and every single day. And so I think we have to hold them accountable. Obviously, your vote is your voice. We have to make sure that we have a system that's designed to make sure everybody has an equitable opportunity at that run for office. So those are all things that we have to keep in mind. Make sure it's more than just sending a message, though, or calling and sending an email. You have to be there in person. Attend their coffee hours, attend their town halls, attend their meetings. Ask them questions that might make them uncomfortable, knowing that they're coming from the right place, or you're just seeking answer, you're seeking to understand more. And push them on issues if they might not agree with you. That's 100% okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think we definitely need to turn up the heat with the pressure, and hold people accountable to make sure that they're actually on the ground in the community that they're serving. Because I didn't know that all the city council members live in West Dearborn. I mean, that doesn't even make sense.
Yeah, I believe maybe one lives in, a portion of the East End, maybe two, one or so. But I know the majority live in the West End, and especially including myself and Sam Baydoun, and the state senator who technically lives in Detroit, but the majority live in West End of Dearborn.
Wow. So how do you see the community making the biggest collective impact?
It's tough to say. I mean, my follow-up question would be on what topic and which area. Everybody has something that they're passionate about. Dearborn for Black Lives is passionate about, issues pertaining to the Black community in this point in time. Whether it's police brutality, whether it's representation in city administration, whether it's, educational justice, so on and so forth. We have other organizations that are rallying around environmental justice. And we collectively make our impact. We have created allyships with neighboring communities, with the Black community, with the Hispanic community, with the environmental community across the state. And we rally together whenever an issue comes afloat and try to devise a long-term strategy. So for me, it's finding a set of people that are passionate about a topic, and for them to get together really at the grassroots level to, have conversations with their neighbors and the residents here in the community to see what they would like, and to move forward in that way. So, it's not 100% answer for you, but I think that's where it starts. It starts an honest conversation such as these, and then people moving forward. It doesn't have to be led by the elected official. Let me be the first to say that. I'd rather, it not be led by an elected official, so that there's no political motive behind it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So what do you say to people? I guess I want to kind of talk about civic engagement right now. And what do you say to people that think their vote doesn't matter? Like their one vote won't count?
I have a friend of mine, Yusuf Rabi. He's the state representative for the Ann Arbor area. His first election, he ran for county commission out in that area. He tells you a story where he ran across one of his friends on his moped, and he asked his friend, had you voted yet? He said no. He gave him his moped so that he can go vote. On the way back, that friend crashed that moped and totaled it. But he cast his vote. Yusuf Rabi won by 1 vote that election.
Wow.
Every vote matters. It really does. In my election, we didn't win by the largest margin. And it's important for you to know that you have to also get into the habit of voting. It's a strong habit. And so if you look at here in the city of Dearborn, I'll give you the numbers. Like we said, the city might be about 50% minority, 50% white. If you look at the voting numbers, though, the vote is about 70% white and 30% minority, largely Arab American. And so if we really want representation, we also have to step it up in terms of organizing and getting the vote out. Mm-hmm. Or else you're never going to have representation. It ends up being about, well, how many white candidates are running so they can divide the white vote? How many Arab candidates are running so they can divide the Arab vote? Can we solidify the Arab candidates so we can solidify the Arab vote? Those are all conversations that tend to happen, but you have to get the vote out. There's no reason why Arab Americans don't make up 50% of the vote right now. We're also the fastest growing part of the population here in the city of Dearborn. We have to register those youth. There's automatic registration now. We have to educate our parents who might have come from countries where voting was not a thing.
Yeah.
We have to educate them on, their vote matters here where it might not have mattered overseas. They might not say that they care about the city council seat or the mayor seat here, but they care about who the next prime minister is in Lebanon. We have to change that mindset. They have to understand how important these local elections are here. And Mariam just said Biden.
I know, I saw that.
You just caught me off guard.
Literally what dreams are made of.
Yeah. Rima just asked, how do we get closer to 50%? Yeah. We have to work smarter, more effectively. There's no reason why we don't advocate for polling places inside of mosques. Some people might be hesitant to say that. We have polling places inside of churches. We don't have them inside of mosques. We have them inside of schools. There's no reason why, within the Arab community, the barber shop is very much kind of similar to the Black community. There's no reason why the hair salons and our barbershops here in Dearborn, we're not using those to reach people where they are. We tend to forget to do that. We think people should come to us if they want to register to vote. We need to meet people where they are. And so that means going to the mosque, asking religious leaders to speak every Friday, reminding them the importance of voting. Even if they don't want to speak to whatever candidate they support. It's just about the importance and getting into the habit of voting. Going to the local hangout places, whether it's the hookah lounges or whatever it is. If I owned a hookah lounge, I would not let you enter unless you were a registered voter.
I love that.
There are so many things we can be doing to try to engage. For the Iraqi community, which I call the Iraqi community the sleeping giants, because I think they've largely been untapped in terms of the political process. Meeting them at the Husseini's, the smaller mosque that they're at, setting up shop there, making sure people are registered, the importance of voting, speaking to them in the language that they speak. All these are extremely important. Within the Yemeni community, we're seeing, the Yemeni community is growing in terms of political power. And it's great to see. It's honestly amazing to see how far the Yemeni community has come in such a short amount of time. And it's because the Yemeni community really had a fire lit under them about the importance of civic engagement, which I think is unmatched by any other Arab community here in the city of Dearborn. And so there's a lot that we can learn also by working together.
No, definitely. And kind of to go off of that, what would you say to someone that says local politics doesn't matter? Like anything that is local, they're like, oh, this doesn't matter. It's not significant to my life.
I mean, you name the issue that matters to you, and 9 times out of 10, that is determined by somebody at the state house and down.
Mm-hmm.
If it's the cost of tuition, we can talk about how state elected officials can help make that determination. If it's how much our teachers are getting paid and how much our schools are getting, that is determined at the state level. That's not determined at the federal level. Certainly, there's federal dollars to help. Again, it's largely determined at the state level. If it's about the environmental injustice that's happening here in the South End and in Southwest Detroit, the city council and the mayor have so much impact if they were to just utilize it. They could have so much impact if they were to just utilize it. The state level as well. If it's about your community parks that you really care for, you want to see more parks, you want to see more pools, that's largely determined at the county level and at the city level. So you name the issue, and there's almost a solution or a way to address that problem that's determined at the local level. City council and the mayor's office really, for me, is just the, it's the pinnacle of public service.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about issues that impact residents each and every single day. And honestly, it's a blessing to be in such a position. At the state level, I mean, you named the topic, and we've tried addressing it. I wish we had a majority of like-minded folk to pass a lot of legislation we're introducing, but we don't. But I promise you, the issues you care about, and I know I'm repeating myself, are at the local level, the state level, and down. So
we have a question. What do you say to single issue voters, since most Americans are? I mean, that's our community, though.
It is. No, it really is. I remember when I first ran for office, one of the most frequently asked questions I got was where are you on the issue of choice? And that was the red line for them, the issue of choice and abortion. I spoke my piece. I'm a very strong pro-choice candidate. I don't think the government should interfere with a woman's decision in her body. I don't think a government should interfere with anybody's body, frankly, right? But obviously, the issue of choice, we're speaking of women. And it might not been they might not have loved that answer.
Mm-hmm.
But when I flipped the script and told them, well, if you're okay with setting a precedent where a government can interfere there, well, how do you feel about the government interfering on organ donation and mandating organ donation? And then, for organ donation, for many Muslims, there's a no-no. He said, no, we don't like that. So I said, well, how is it that, you don't want the government to make that determination for you on organ donation, but you're okay with telling women what they can or cannot do with their bodies?
Yeah.
So there's also ways to navigate the conversation. Additionally, people always talk about, marijuana was a big issue in the community, legalization of marijuana. And I think we as a community have to get into the mindset of, we live in a secular society. What may be legal doesn't mean you have to preach within your own household.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I grew up, in a very in a very Muslim household, and alcohol was just something I never came around to. Right. There's always stay away from alcohol, stay away from alcohol. But nobody I was speaking with was telling me, well, how are we going to close down these bars? When I promise you, alcohol use disorder impacts your children more than the possibility of an abortion. And so sometimes we're small-minded in our thought process, and so we really just we have to be more than one issue. You're never going to agree 100% with a candidate.
Yes, exactly.
It will never happen. If you need to agree 100% with a candidate, please save your time right now. Even if it's city council, you're not going to agree with where they want to place a stop sign.
Yeah.
And so I would advise you to save yourself that headache. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And we would be losing out on so much if that was the golden standard, that 100% agreement on every issue. It doesn't work that way.
No, it definitely doesn't. I feel like it's really problematic if you agree 100% with a candidate, because then it's like, at what point do you have your own beliefs?
100%. And sometimes just because I believe something doesn't mean that my belief is right.
Yeah.
Right. I have to take a step back sometimes out of my own identity, being a Muslim and Arab. I'm not living in a Muslim society, and I have to, I'm here in America, and I'm here to abiding the laws of America, and what's best for the secular society moving forward. If it's the LGBT community, from my perspective, I spoke to earlier growing up, being discriminated against because I'm Muslim or Arab. Why on earth would I ever be in a position then where I would be okay with the discrimination of any community, including the LGBT community?
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, expand civil rights to make sure that they are not discriminated against in the place of work or any place for that matter.
Yeah.
So we have to be thinking like that. We have to create these bridges of allyships and understanding.
Yeah. I mean, I think like all of your policies and like your views speak to putting the community and putting people at the center.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a question up there about Trump, and what would you say to somebody that thinks that Trump is good for business and wants to vote for Trump for that reason?
I have these conversations each and every single day with constituents who call. And, if you are willing to overlook everything else that Trump has said or done because of a tax break, that speaks volumes of your priorities.
Mm-hmm.
That informs me, and I think the greater community, that you're given the green light, even if silent, to the racism, to the words he evokes, to, he has empowered a new, racism has obviously always been here. Yeah. He's removed the veil and he's emboldened racists to just be outward with it. So you're given a green light and you're silent on that fact, all for the benefit of yourself. And if there's anything about public service means you put your own, self-interest aside and you put the public's first. Mm-hmm. And as a community, that's the way that we need to be thinking. And so I've had those conversations. They're very difficult. But I also keep a quote in the back of my mind. I have, somebody once said, I have never won an argument with an ignorant person, and I've never lost one with a knowledgeable one. And so if you realize that you're dealing with someone who is ignorant and you just cannot win that conversation, sometimes you have to just cut it short and keep on.
No, that's real. I think it hurts the most when Arabs, that's like their mentality, and it's like, you just don't get it. But
yeah.
No,
I see a question there about how do you bridge these gaps specifically between Black community and non-Black Arab community. There are many organizations that are already doing this work. And it's important to note that, if we have this idea, we shouldn't go out there and start our own thing right away. Sometimes you need to ask the question, is there anybody currently in this space that's doing the work? We just might not know about it, and try to be a part of that effort. Access does great work. There are a lot of organizations that do phenomenal work. Let's just, do that homework, do that research. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me a message. We're connected with a lot of these organizations. Happy to point you in the right direction. And then if there's nobody operating in that space or doing it well, 100%, it's time to step up to the plate and come with like-minded folk to move forward together.
Absolutely, absolutely. So what are action items that you can give people in the community to practice today, tomorrow, the next day, in terms of anti-Black racism?
So, first, I'd say, man, that's a tough one. And it's because, Dima just asked, speak to your younger force and self, convince them to care about eradicating anti-Black racism. I don't know. That's a great question. I don't know what I would tell my younger self. I like to think that if someone sat me down and, I think in the high school days, obviously you're so focused on yourself, right? And what you want to do for school. But this is such a great question. I honestly, what I keep on defaulting in my head is pick up a book and read. Right now I'm actually about halfway done with Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me.
One of my favorites.
I finally just got around to it, and it is so profound. I've reread the first, I don't know how many pages over and over and over again. And, one of the quickest takeaways that I got, he has this line in it that says, racism isn't the son of race. Race is racism is the father of race. Essentially, race was created so that racism can proliferate.
Yep.
And I thought that was just mind shattering if you really think about it. So I would educate yourself first and foremost. Before you go out there, before you rally, before you organize, before you mobilize and speak and reshare and repost, understand the history of this country, understand the history of this world, and how white wealth was built by slavery, what redlining was, the Jim Crow era, what redlining is like in this current and now and modern 2020. What does redlining look like? What does discrimination look like today? Where does it originate from? What are those forms look like? So educate yourself, educate yourself, educate yourself. Read Black authors, lean on Black minds. There are so many that unfortunately we don't know enough about, including myself. The book I have in my office up in Lansing is James Baldwin's collection. That's the book I turn to read in moments of struggle and when I'm just looking for inspiration. And what they wrote about 50, 60 years ago is as relevant today, if not ever. And so for me, that's the first piece of advice, and I think that's where I would leave it.
Yeah.
Educate yourself before you take that step forward.
Yeah, reading is so important. So what other books have done it for you besides Between the World and Me and then James Baldwin?
The autobiography of Malcolm X, obviously, is a phenomenal book. Man, I got the Muhammad Ali book right behind me. That book is masterful.
Yeah.
What else did it for me? Again, this last year, I took that road trip down to Selma. I went to Martin Luther King's resting place. I crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge. I learned from our historians of American history, and absolutely mind blowing. We know of Rosa Parks, obviously, but then to read more in depth about the Montgomery bus strikes and what they were willing to sacrifice in order to achieve something. I think we as a generation, unfortunately, don't know what that's like. We think sacrifice is, I can't go dine in at a restaurant because of COVID.
Yep.
Sacrifice was walking miles and miles on foot, regardless of the weather, because of a discriminatory busing policy.
Yep.
For over a year.
Yeah,
that
I
was
didn't know it
sacrifice.
was over a year.
Yeah, I mean, that was sacrifice made by a whole community, and it takes perseverance. Like I told you earlier, we had our first rally, our second rally, our third rally here in Dearborn, and it's kind of fizzled out. And so, we have to be persistent. We cannot become desensitized. And that happens far too often. So I think educate yourself, go learn from the history books, learn from trusted sources, read Black authors, read from Black minds, and go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said too from before, it's definitely a process, and it's learning, it's education. It's never gonna happen overnight. And we all have the duty to do that. Like, we need to hold each other accountable. Okay, I think there's a question. How do we acknowledge performative or even selective activism in our Arab communities, especially when it becomes a trend like the blackout? Okay.
That's a great question. Unfortunately, and I don't want to limit this trend to just the Arab community. This is a trend in media across the board. Unfortunately, and Jon Stewart spoke to this about how the media, this media conglomerate now has a 24-hour news cycle, and they have to always be talking about something. However, if it's a major issue, it's in the media stream for 24 hours, 48 hours, and then the media moves on to something else, and attention spans move on to something else. When the era of social media, there's also this, well, I tweeted, I posted about it, I've done my part, let's move forward. And I think that speaks a lot of our generation, and I see change on the ground. Protests are still happening, even though they're not being covered. Yes. And that's the interesting thing. Media wanted to cover the protests when they turned into riots, quote unquote, right? But they no longer want to cover them now. And to that point, I think there were some 35, 36 states that spray painted Black Lives Matter on their streets. But only one state actually took meaningful action legislatively.
Yeah.
And so this isn't an Arab problem. This is an American issue that we need to address. We need to be persistent. We need to be in the streets protesting, rallying until the change that we desire is enacted. If it's not, if you let up, the elected officials are going to think, hey, it was a phase. It was a trend. They've moved on. They'll come back to it the next time something happens.
Yeah.
And I think that's largely, the onus is on us.
Yes.
To be out there and to be consistent.
Yeah, exactly. No, exactly. And being uncomfortable with not knowing, and being uncomfortable with not always having the answers. And I mean, even what you're speaking to right now, like electing people that have the community at the center and people focus. So everybody elects
Yeah.
Abdullah for everything else.
And to the point about the media and such, and to our conversation of representation earlier, we need representation in media.
Yeah.
We need representation in every single segment and every single industry.
Exactly.
It was great to see Abdul, for example, on CNN, right? Somebody with a name like mine who looks like me, speaking so profoundly on CNN. That was great to see, but we need more of that.
Exactly.
We need more people, who look like us, who talk like us, who say 100%, out at the forefront. But they shouldn't just run for office. They should be the ones running campaigns. They shouldn't just run campaigns. They should be the ones selecting the candidates. They should be the major donors. They should be on the media. They should be in sports. They should be in every segment of society, in order for us to have that true representation, to keep things alive in the media, to keep shedding light.
Absolutely. We need to be the ones telling our stories, because right now the stories being told of our communities don't match what we live, breathe, and see every day. And we know that because Arabs don't turn on the TV to see positive messages of who we are, what we look like. When's the last time you've ever, besides, I think Abdullah was, the first time I'm like, oh, wow. Because even if you have, minor examples like Aladdin, Aladdin wasn't even, that was a joke. That was conflating identities. It's we don't even have the bare minimum, too. So that's where the problem stems from.
100%. I mean, we're living in a consumerism era, and everything revolves around ratings and revenue and what people are willing to pay to see or pay to hear. So fortunately, I don't have live TV anymore. I'm 100% over to my subscriptions, and I've canceled all commercials because I can't handle it.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't do anything for you. It's literally the same thing on repeat, too.
Yeah, but find those trusted media sources. I follow a lot on Twitter. We have a lot of Arab American, Muslim American, Black American reporters that are that are just so great, and we need to promote them, retweet them, reshare them, provide your platform to them, because those are the minds that we need to elevate.
Yeah, exactly. I think you just answered Chanel's question. How do you think media can better represent Arab Americans and Black people? Yeah, it's amplifying those voices and making sure they're the forefront of telling the stories when the story needs to be told. Well, this has been great, Abdullah. Thank you.
Of course. To the last point of representation, and this is where it really clicked in my mind in Lansing just how much we lack representation. This 2 years, I sit on what's called the Department of Health and Human Services budget.
Okay.
The state of Michigan budget is about $60 billion. This DHHS budget, Health and Human Services, is $30 billion. We sit, there's something called work group, where you basically sit on a long table over a period of a few weeks, and you go line by line over every single dollar and how it is spent. And think of the power of that, how you spend $30 billion. Across the whole room, I was the only person of color.
Wow.
And determining how $30 billion was spent. And there were 30 plus people sitting around that table. I walked out of that room and I called Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist, who's the first African American Lieutenant Governor here in the state of Michigan. And I spoke to that, and I spoke to the governor about that. They're trying to be more, particular about hires, making sure we have representation. But again, we just determined $30 billion of spending, and not a single Black voice was on that. Not a single Latino voice was on that table. Aside from me, it was an all-white table. And that's representation, honestly.
Yeah, and we know that Wayne County consistently ranks last every single year when it comes to public health. Correct. And it's Detroit, because of the fact that Detroit doesn't get the opportunities that other counties do, and it's just we know why this happens.
100%. I mean, I'll give you another example. We all complain about our roads, right? Our roads are very awful here in Michigan. Everybody across the country knows how bad roads are here in Michigan. Let me tell you how they're funded. Every square mile gets the same amount of money. Every mile gets the same amount of money. Whether you're a 4-lane highway here in Southeast Michigan or a 1-lane highway out west or up north, you get the same amount of money. And so the current speaker represents Mackinac Island and above. And he's on record saying he would never change that road funding formula because that would mean more money going to the roads that are used more often and less money, even though it's not needed, for the roads up north. So representation matters. I cannot tell you. If you look at our schools and how schools are funded, per pupil funding, Grosse Pointe gets like $11,000 per kid. And if you look at Dearborn Public Schools, we're about $7,000-8,000. So we have to also talk about, it's not always just about equal, it's also about equity. And we can get into that conversation.
Yep. There's a huge difference.
Property taxes being used to fund schools is very problematic. And here's what that means. If you go to Ann Arbor just passed a $1 billion plan. They raised what's called 1 millage on property taxes, which generates $1 billion. Here in Dearborn, we would have to raise, and this is, if you're not familiar with millages, we'd have to do like 20 millages of property, which would increase our property taxes drastically to raise the same amount of money that Ann Arbor did with just 1 millage. And so a wealthier community, largely white community, has access to better schools because their property values their home values are much higher. So poorer communities have to leverage more taxes because their home values are much lower.
Wow.
So it's such a backward system.
Yes.
And without representation, it'll never change.
Yeah, no, that's true. If we don't have the right people advocating for things that directly affect people that look and sound like them, you're right, it's never going to change. Yeah. Mariam said, abolish school funding by property tax.
And it's, I 100% agree with that. And, for those who are really in tune with property taxes, progressives look at property tax and say, this is a progressive tax. We love it. Wealthier homes pay more. Yes, it's progressive at a very micro level view. You have a bigger home, you have a more expensive home, you pay more in taxes. But at a community perspective, it's 100% regressive. Flint, Saginaw, Dearborn, Detroit, we have the highest property taxes in the whole state. And our school infrastructure does not show it.
Wow.
So,
wow. Well, Abdullah, this has been amazing.
Rima is the best hype woman.
Her and Mariam.
And Bill Bazzi, listen, shout out, of course, to my wife, Fatma, who's the best. So
you have quite the hype squad going on right now.
I did not pay them. They chimed in on their own.
I mean, I feel like it's really just a testament to like you and like what you do for our community. And I hope you know this, but we all love you. We all appreciate you so much. Seriously.
I appreciate it sincerely. I love you guys too. Calls to action. Complete your census. You want to talk about representation? You want to talk about representation? Please complete your census. 5 minutes of your time will determine how much funding our community gets for the next 10 years. Unfortunately, we lost a portion of representation in this census where Arab Americans were very close to being recognized as Middle East North African. But Trump and his administration struck that down.
Yeah.
So, if you're filling out your census, put down your Arab American or Middle East North African. Please put that down so we can still show that we here exist. It's not enough that we're only MENA or Arab when we walk through TSA. Right? We need grant funding specifically for our communities, healthcare funding, education funding, and that all is determined by the census. If you go to census.gov, you can go there to complete your census. I think you can still complete it online. If not, enumerators will be at your door. But I think you can still complete it online. If you haven't registered to vote, please do so. You can register all the way up until the day of the election. You can vote in advance. You can do absentee voting now. Everybody is able to do that. Please do so. Another call to action. Submit your ballot. Get 10 friends or family members to submit their ballots in now so we can get that done.
Yep, absolutely.
And then, honestly, Mariam just brought up Rashida, who's running for re-election right now. Go to Rashida's website and donate $5. She's somebody who we need in Congress. That is representation. She's a champion of her community. So please go and support her as well.
Absolutely. Okay, we have like 20 seconds left.
Go for it.
Thank you so much for everything. You've been amazing. Looking forward to continuing the conversation. Always. So thank
No,
you.
thank you. If anybody needs anything, just shoot me a message on Instagram or Facebook. I'm happy to respond. If it's unemployment, if it's pertaining to unemployment, our office is getting to it. But shoot us a message and we'll be glad to assist wherever we can. Thank you guys, Dearborn girls, for what you guys are doing. You guys